Somewhere in the last hour, you compared your life to a stranger's, and you didn't even notice it happening. Not your friend's life, not your neighbor's, a stranger's. Someone whose kitchen you'll never stand in, whose parents you'll never meet, whose worst days you will never see. And for a few seconds, some part of you quietly decided you were losing. This isn't a willpower problem. It isn't vanity, and it isn't insecurity in the way you've been taught to think about it. It's a mechanism, one so old and so automatic that you couldn't switch it off even if you tried, because your brain was never built to leave a comparison unmade. In 1954, a psychologist named Leon Festinger noticed something strange about how people figure out who they are. He proposed that humans don't have an internal ruler for measuring their own abilities or opinions. There's no built-in gauge that tells you if you're smart, attractive, successful, or behind. Instead, Festinger argued, we figure out where we stand by looking sideways. We measure ourselves against other people, constantly, automatically, almost without realizing we're doing it. He called it social comparison theory. And more than 70 years later, it's still one of the most replicated ideas in psychology. But here's the detail most people miss. Festinger wasn't just describing a habit. He was describing a need. His research suggested that humans have a built-in drive to evaluate themselves, and when no objective standard exists, other people become the only ruler available. Think about what that means. You don't compare yourself to others because you're weak or shallow. You compare yourself to others because your brain has no other way to answer the question every human eventually asks, am I okay? For most of human history, this system worked fine because the group of people available for comparison was small and close. You compared yourself to the 15 or 20 people in your tribe, your village, your extended family. And crucially, you saw all of them completely. You saw them exhausted. You saw them sick. You saw them fail at hunting, fail at farming, argue with their spouses, bury their children. Your comparison pool was small, but it was honest. That honesty mattered more than you'd think. When you compare yourself to someone whose full life you can see, the comparison self-corrects. You notice their successes and their struggles in roughly equal measure, so your sense of, am I okay, stays anchored somewhere close to reality. If the best hunter in your group also lost his brother to illness that winter, your brain registered both facts together, and the comparison came out balanced. Envy had a natural ceiling, because information about someone's hardship arrived at the same speed as information about their success. Now consider what happens when you open your phone. In seconds, your comparison pool expands from 20 people to 20,000, and every single one of them is filtered, not necessarily by a conscious lie, but by a much older, quieter instinct. The instinct to present your best angle, because appearing capable and attractive has always mattered for survival and status. Nobody posts the argument. Nobody posts the diagnosis. Nobody posts the version of the kitchen with dishes piled in the sink. You're not comparing your full life to their full life anymore. You're comparing your full life, mess included, to their highlight reel. Festinger's theory never accounted for this, because it couldn't. He was writing in a world where full information about other people was the default. He had no way to predict a world where the information itself would be engineered. Psychologist Twenge has spent years studying what happened once that engineered comparison became constant. Her research tracking large surveys of teenagers found a sharp shift in mental health markers that began right around the time smartphones and social platforms became universal, particularly among girls, who tend to engage in more appearance and lifestyle-based comparison online. Twenge's work doesn't prove smartphones alone caused every change, But it lines up with something Festinger's original theory would actually predict. Give the comparison drive an unlimited filtered pool of targets, and the drive doesn't rest. It escalates. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. The comparisons you're making aren't even comparisons to real, complete people anymore. You're comparing yourself to a curated slice, a single extracted moment, stripped of the boring hours and bad days that surrounded it. And your ancient comparison machinery, the one Festinger identified, doesn't know how to discount for that. It doesn't have a filter that says, adjust for the fact that this is fake. It just registers the input and quietly recalculates your standing. Researchers studying this pattern have given it a name: upward social comparison. That's the specific kind of comparing where you measure yourself against people who appear better off, and it's the version that does the most damage to mood and self-esteem. Downward comparison, measuring yourself against people worse off, tends to make you feel better temporarily. But scroll through any social platform and notice what's actually being shown to you. Vacations, promotions, engagement rings, bodies sculpted by hours you didn't see. The entire architecture of these platforms is optimized to serve you upward comparisons, because upward comparisons are more emotionally activating, and emotionally activating content is what keeps you scrolling. You are, in a very real sense, standing in a room custom-built to make you feel like you're losing. And it was built that way on purpose, not out of malice exactly, but because your dissatisfaction is a byproduct of an engagement model that doesn't care whether you leave that room feeling worse than when you walked in. It helps to understand exactly how that room gets built, because it isn't random. Recommendation systems learn from a single overwhelming signal: how long you stayed, and what made you stop scrolling. A photo of a stranger's ordinary Tuesday rarely stops the thumb. A photo of a stranger's engagement, a stranger's six-pack, a stranger's oceanfront balcony tends to. Not necessarily because it makes people happy to see it. Often the opposite. Content that provokes a flicker of envy, insecurity, or longing holds attention exceptionally well. And attention is the only currency these systems are built to collect. Nobody had to design a feature called "make the user feel inadequate." It emerged naturally from a much simpler instruction: show people more of whatever keeps them watching. So why does it still work on you, even when you know all of this? Because knowing doesn't disable the mechanism. This is the same mistake people make with optical illusions. You can know, with total certainty, that two lines are the same length, and your eyes will still show you two different lengths. Festinger's comparison drive operates the same way. You can know, intellectually, that the photo is staged, the body is lit and angled, the vacation was 3 good hours out of a mediocre week, and your gut will still deliver the verdict before your logic gets a vote. There's a physiological layer to this too, one that helps explain why the sting feels so immediate. Brain imaging research on social comparison has found that losing out in a comparison activates regions associated with physical and social pain, in much the same way rejection does. Your brain isn't treating "that person's life looks better than mine" as neutral information to be filed away and weighed rationally. It's treating it, at least briefly, as a small blow. That's part of why a single photo can knock the wind out of you in a way that seems disproportionate to what actually happened, which is that you looked at a rectangle of pixels for 2 seconds. There's a reason this hits some moments harder than others too. Comparison researchers have found that the drive intensifies during periods of uncertainty. When you're unsure how you're doing in your career, your relationship, your body, your life in general, you reach for external reference points more aggressively because that internal ruler Festinger described was never there to begin with. The less certain you feel, the more you scroll, And the more you scroll, the more upward comparisons you're fed, and the less certain you feel. It's a loop with no natural exit, because the platform was never designed to provide one. It also compounds in a way most people never notice. Each comparison doesn't just cost you a moment of mood. Repeated upward comparison has been linked in longitudinal survey research to lower self-esteem and higher rates of depressive symptoms over time, particularly when the comparisons are about appearance or lifestyle, rather than skills or achievements you can actually act on. That distinction matters. Comparing your guitar playing to a musician you admire can motivate practice. Comparing your body, your house, or your relationship to a stranger's curated feed gives you nothing to act on, because there's no real skill to build, no lesson to extract. It's a dead-end comparison, all cost and no signal, and those are exactly the ones the feed serves you most. So what do you actually do with a drive this old, running inside a system this new? You can't switch it off. That's not a realistic goal, and chasing it will only add self-criticism to the pile. But you can change what you feed it. Festinger's own research showed something useful buried in the original theory. People preferentially compare themselves to others who are genuinely similar to them, not to the most extreme, most polished example available. The comparison drive isn't inherently rigged to make you miserable. It was hijacked by a feed algorithm optimized to show you the most extreme cases over and over, because extreme cases hold your attention longer than ordinary ones. Which means the fix isn't willpower, it's architecture. Notice what accounts leave you feeling smaller after you close the app, and what accounts don't. Your ancient comparison machinery will keep firing no matter what you do. But you get to choose, at least partly, what it's given to compare yourself against. Unfollowing isn't weakness or avoidance. It's the modern version of something your ancestors never had to do consciously, because their environment did it for them, curating who gets close enough to count as your measuring stick. Somewhere in the next hour, you'll open your phone again, and somewhere in that scroll, you'll compare your life to a stranger's without noticing it happening. That won't stop. It can't. What can change is which stranger and which sliver of their life you let stand in as the measure of your own.